And we'll start in the UK, where minutes from now, Boris Johnson will be grilled in the House of Commons at the weekly Prime Minister's Questions session. A group of Conservative parliamentarians elected in 2019 say they're sending in letters which could lead very soon to a confidence vote for the Prime Minister. On Tuesday, Boris Johnson gave an interview in which colleagues say he looked broken, which for some MPs has accelerated their desire to change leader. He was asked in the interview if he lied to Parliament when last week he said he thought at the time that a May 20th, 2020 gathering that he attended was simply a work event.
No, nobody told me that what we were doing was, as you say, against the rules, that the event in question was something that we were going to do something that wasn't a work event. And, as I said in the House of Commons, when I went out into that garden, I thought that I was attending a work event.
Well, it was pointed out after that interview that the rules Boris Johnson references are, of course, rules constructed and imposed by the Prime Minister and his government. Here's how a leadership challenge could unfold. There are 360 Conservative lawmakers in Parliament. 15% need to submit letters to the 1922 Conservative Committee chairman to trigger a vote of confidence. That means 54 letters are needed. Reports currently vary wildly about how close we are to that threshold. The chairman of the committee is the only person who genuinely knows. Rishi Sunak, the British finance minister who has Indian heritage, has been tipped as one of Boris Johnson's most likely successors. And when asked if the Prime Minister was trustworthy, Rishi Sunak gave a fairly lukewarm show of support.
Of course I do. The Prime Minister
set out the truth.
Of course I do. The Prime Minister set out his understanding of this matter in Parliament last week, and I'd refer you to his words. As you know, Sue Gray is conducting an inquiry into this matter, and I fully support the Prime Minister's request for patience while that inquiry concludes.
The latest attempts to remove Boris Johnson are being called the pork pie plot. That's because one of those MPs elected in the 2019 intake who is involved represents the Melton Mowbray area, famous for its pork pies. Boris Johnson does have something of an opportunity today, though, to try and launch a fight back. Not only that weekly Prime Minister's Questions session we've already mentioned, he's also due to make a statement to the House of Commons in which we expect him to announce that many, if not all, current so-called Plan B COVID restrictions can be removed as soon as next week. Let's talk to our London correspondent, Giles Gibson, now. And Giles, let's start by talking about that possible leadership challenge for the Prime Minister. How quickly could we see a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister if those letters go in and hit that 54 number?
Well, Ollie, the only person who really knows exactly how close we are to triggering that no confidence vote, how many letters have been sent in by Conservative MPs, is of course Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 committee. But if at some stage in the coming days we get to that point where more than 54 Conservative MPs have sent in their letters, then things could actually move pretty quickly. We could see a no confidence vote taking place within 24 hours perhaps of Graham Brady making that announcement. It's really worth noting here, Ollie, that if that does go ahead, and if Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, survives that no confidence vote, if he wins enough support from Tory MPs in the UK Parliament, then the rules of the 1922 committee are that there cannot be another no confidence vote for at least a year after that. So we are not going to see a scenario where Tory MPs who want to get rid of Boris Johnson just keep trying to trigger no confidence votes over the course of the coming weeks. Just a little bit of historical context here. We had, of course, back in December 2018, then British Prime Minister Theresa May, also a Conservative Prime Minister, faced a no confidence vote when she was in the middle of those really fractious Brexit negotiations. She did manage to survive that no confidence vote, but then she ended up resigning just a few months later in the end.
OK, when it comes to today, the Prime Minister does have this opportunity to try and win some of his MPs round.
Yeah, he's got an opportunity to really go on the attack. He is going to be speaking in Prime Minister's questions in just a few moments' time. Of course, the flip side of that is that you're going to have Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition Labour Party, really going on the attack against Boris Johnson after these latest claims from Dominic Cummings, formerly a very close aide to Boris Johnson, saying that Boris Johnson did indeed know that he was going to a party rather than just going to a work event back in May 2020. Boris Johnson will then be moving on at 12:30 local time here in London to talk about the coronavirus pandemic. We are expecting an announcement, perhaps the announcement that they are going to lift Plan B restrictions, which were brought in after the Omicron variant arrived in this country. This is all potentially part of something that's been reported in the British press, this idea that there is something called Operation Red Meat going on in 10 Downing Street right now. So the Prime Minister and his closest aides rolling out policies that are designed to really please backbench Tory MPs who are perhaps right on the edge, sort of at the point of tipping over and sending in their no confidence letter to Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 committee. So that operation reportedly going on inside 10 Downing Street right now, trying to build up support for the Prime Minister inside his own party.
And give us some context here, Giles, because you mentioned that leadership challenge against Theresa May, the previous Conservative Prime Minister, but she didn't have a thumping great big majority in Parliament like Boris Johnson won back in 2019. So how big a turnaround is this politically for him?
This is just a complete 180. If you think about it, it was just over 2 years ago that we had Boris Johnson winning that election here in the United Kingdom, breaking down what's known as the Red Wall in the north of the country, these seats that have been sitting in Labour hands, in the opposition Labour Party's hands for decades and decades in some cases. Now you have the situation where members of Parliament who were elected in 2019, many of them from those Red Wall constituencies, from those constituencies that have been in Labour hands in some cases for their entire existence. You have those MPs reportedly meeting on Tuesday to discuss moving against Boris Johnson and sending in their letters to Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 committee. The argument here is that a lot of these MPs, having just won those seats after they'd been in the hands of Labour for so long, just don't think that they have very much support. Their support in the local community really fragile, and they're concerned about Boris Johnson's unpopularity, perhaps just dragging down their own popularity when they go to the polls eventually for the next election.
OK, and finally, Giles, as you've been explaining, it's still an if when it comes to whether Boris Johnson does get removed as leader and therefore as Prime Minister. But if he does, who's next cab off the rank? Is it Rishi Sunak?
Well, Rishi Sunak is certainly the name that is being bandied around here in London. He has said that he believes Boris Johnson when he says that he believed that he was going to a work event in 10 Downing Street back in May 2020. But he's also repeatedly said in interviews that we need to wait for Sue Gray, the senior civil servant who is investigating the claims of multiple parties and events in 10 Downing Street over the course of the pandemic. He said that we need to wait for her to file her report and complete her investigation. So that does perhaps show a little bit of a chink, a bit of a gap between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. And the other name that's really been bandied around a lot is Liz Truss, the British Foreign Secretary. The issue for her that she is actually travelling to Australia this week, to the other side of the world, to meet with Australian counterparts and talk about foreign policy and defence issues. So that will put her in a very tricky position if we do get to those 54 letters submitted to Graham Brady and then a no confidence vote moving forward. It would be very tricky for Liz Truss to try to sort of corral her troops, to try to build up support for a potential leadership bid if she's over on the other side of the world.